The sound shook the cabin like a final warning. Not thunder, not a gunshot. A helicopter went down in the blizzard. I saw fire through the trees, orange against white, then silence too heavy to be natural. Raymond Cole, 55, stepped into the storm with no plan except don't let anyone else die tonight. He found the body first, twisted metal, snow-stained red. Then a dog, half-buried, still breathing, eyes open but fading. When he lifted the collar, he saw the words scratched into steel. If found, follow the light. Raymond used to save men under fire. Now he struggled to keep his own hands from shaking. He carried that dog back through a world that pretends it doesn't see pain. No rescue team came. No officers stayed long. They told him to hand the dog over and walked away. But that dog woke up screaming at the wind, like it remembered something someone else wanted to forget. And tucked in its gear was a burned name tag, Lieutenant Marin, a man Raymond once knew, or thought he did. Someone crashed that helicopter on purpose. Someone was looking for the dog, and the storm was only the beginning. Before we go further, hit like, share, and subscribe. Where are you watching from, and what are you feeling right now? I want to see how far this story travels before the next secret surfaces. Snow came down like torn pages from a book no one had the heart to finish. It hissed against the tin roof, slid down the window as a slow blur of ghost white, and gathered in tall, soft drifts beneath the pine branches. The air outside had that metallic taste the old folks in Montana always mentioned before a hard winter, something like fear mixed with electricity. There was no bird song, no creaking from the woods, no distant engine on the highway, just silence, as if the land itself had decided to hold its breath. Nights like that have a way of making a man remember everything he's trying to forget. Raymond Cole, 55, woke from a shallow sleep without really knowing why, only that something was off in the way silence deepened. He sat up in the dark cabin, the only light coming from a small oil lamp on the table, flame shivering in the draft creeping under the door. He had the lean frame of a man who once relied on muscle and instinct, now softened by time, but not by peace. A scar traveled from the top of his left shoulder, disappearing beneath his flannel shirt like a river into dark ground. He listened, not with his ears at first, but with that strange residual sense that survives war and loss, the one that tightens the chest and dries the throat before sound ever arrives. Then it hit, a boom so low it shook the floorboards, followed by a dull, distant crack. Not thunder, not ice splitting. Raymond's pulse spiked. He recognized the sound of metal giving way. He grabbed his heavy coat, the green M65 he'd kept from deployment, slipped his feet into worn boots, and stepped outside. The wind rushed at him like an old enemy, cold running knives across his face. He didn't hesitate. He headed toward the ridge where the sound came from, moving through snow already knee-deep, gait uneven but steady. His cabin stood on the edge of a forest that had no name people agreed on. Locals just called it the Line, where pine and wind carved out their own country. Tonight, that country glowed strangely, a soft orange flicker dying fast behind the tree trunks to the west. Raymond pushed harder, breath loud in the cotton-thick air, lungs stinging with every inhale. He reached a slope and saw it clearly. The carcass of a rescue helicopter broken open in the snow, tail twisted, rotor blades buried. The smell came next, burned plastic, jet fuel, and something darker. Raymond moved slow, scanning the scene with old habits that never faded. One body lay crumpled near the exposed cockpit. A man in a heavy flight suit, maybe mid-30s, face turned away. snow already building on his back. Raymond crouched beside him, touched his neck, but found the skin stiff under the frost. The man's name tag was half melted, but one word remained: Marin. Raymond closed the man's eyes, a gesture he never forgot from medic training. The wind shoved through the clearing. Snowflakes hissed against hot metal. That was when he heard it. A sound so soft he almost doubted it. A whine, low, then a sharp breath, then silence. He followed it around the wreckage, stepping over pieces of fiberglass and a torn duffel bag scattered with torn field maps. There, partly buried beneath a wing fragment, lay a large K9, black and tan, ribs rising shallow, eyes open just a sliver. The dog's harness was scorched, straps frayed, metal buckle bent nearly in half. Raymond swept away snow from the tag on the collar. A single name remained above the burn mark: Max. He spoke out loud without meaning to. Easy. You're all right. Just stay with me. Max did not move to bite or flee. He just watched with that ancient animal patience that always seems like trust, but is really something closer to recognition. Raymond slid his arms under the dog's weight and lifted, a pain shooting across his shoulder from the old wound he tried not to think about. Snow pelted his face as he carried Max back through the trees, each step a small battle. Twice he stopped to catch his breath. Twice Max opened his eyes wider, as if urging him forward. By the time he reached the cabin, his hands were numb and his coat soaked through. He kicked the door shut behind them with his heel, lowered Max onto an old wool blanket near the fireplace, and lit a fresh log. The smell of pine resin filled the room, masking the scent of burned fur. Raymond fetched his first aid kit from under the table, the same one he used on himself after nights haunted by memories he wouldn't speak of. He cleaned the wounds, pressed gauze against the worst tear near Max's right shoulder, and winced when the dog twitched but didn't snarl. Outside, headlights cut across the window. A truck pulled up, tires crunching through snow. Sheriff Hannah Coleridge stepped out, coat pulled tight, radio in hand. She was mid-40s, tall, dark hair tucked beneath a knit cap, face carved by long winters and hard decisions. She knocked once. Raymond answered but didn't open the door fully. Hannah peered past him, saw the shape on the floor. "Ray," she said, voice steady. "That dog needs to go back to the station, military property." Raymond didn't reply. He stood in the doorway, blocking her view, jaw tight. Snow blew in small swirls between them. Hannah watched him a long moment, then nodded as if she'd expected this. "Just be careful," she said before leaving. Her truck pulled away. Taillights swallowed by white darkness, Max stirred, letting out a short whimper, not fear exactly, but a warning softened by exhaustion. Raymond sat beside him, wiping away soot from the metal collar. His fingers paused when he noticed something faint, something etched shallow into the underside of the clasp. He turned it toward the lamplight. 4 words, barely there, scratched by someone who knew they might not survive long enough to explain. If found, follow the light. Raymond stared until the letters blurred. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters. He closed his eyes, let his hand rest on Max's head, and whispered words he hadn't said in years. "Nobody's dying tonight." Then he leaned back, the fire popping, Max's breath slow beside him, and he understood without knowing why. Whatever this was, it had only just begun. The second morning came without birds or sun, only a dull light behind clouds that had forgotten color. Max lay beside the wood stove, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths, as if sleep was a battlefield all on its own. A kettle hissed on the stove. That thin metallic sound that should have meant comfort. But the dog's ears flicked sharply and his eyes opened with a jolt. Wind slipped under the cabin door, whistling a note high enough to cut memories open. Raymond turned down the flame fast, careful not to scrape metal against metal, careful not to let sound take control. Max tried to stand too quickly, and his body said no. He slumped sideways, claws scratching for grip on the old pine floor. Raymond crouched, one knee popping, and steadied the dog with both hands, holding him the way a medic holds a wounded soldier when he doesn't dare speak hope aloud. Outside, the snow kept falling in a long, steady hush. He could feel the weight of it on the cabin roof, pressing down like a thought too heavy to finish. Inside, the world was measured by small movements. The trembling muscle along Max's shoulder, the twitch in his eyelid, the soft whine trying to fight its way out. By afternoon, Max could drink a little water. He lapped slowly, then froze when a gust rattled the shutters. Not a bark, not a growl, only terror tightening in the ribs. Raymond recognized that look because he owned a version of it. He had long ago learned to hide it, to bury it under silence and routine. But it was still there, coiled in the same place sound used to live. Fear of noise. Fear of remembering what noise once meant. In war, noise told you when friends died, when mistakes became graves, when something too fast and too bright burned the world. Raymond set a bowl on the floor and spoke to the empty air. "Sit, soldier. Easy now." Max didn't obey the words, but the cadence mattered. Something in the tone. Raymond remembered using that voice in tents lit by dim red lamps, jungle humidity clinging to skin, someone bleeding through gauze that wouldn't stay clean. He didn't think of it as training at first. It was closer to talking to himself, reminding his own hands not to shake. Yet by the third day, Max moved when Raymond pointed, lowered his head when told, and, most telling of all, looked to him first whenever sound tried to break through. Sheriff Hannah returned once just before dusk. Snow clung to her boots and the bottom of her coat. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood on the porch, arms crossed, breath fogging in the icy air. Her eyes landed on Max through the window, then cut back to Raymond with something tense and unspoken behind them. "Still breathing," she said. He nodded. She tapped her radio with a gloved finger. "Funny thing, that helicopter didn't file a flight plan, no distress signal, and the report is already labeled equipment failure." She waited, letting the words hang like icicles. Then she lowered her voice. "You ever see a failure that clean?" Raymond didn't answer. Hannah's jaw tightened, maybe the only sign she was worried. "Someone wanted that crash quiet," she said. Then she left, tires grinding over ice, taillights swallowed by white distance. That night, Raymond and Max sat beside the stove while wind dragged a branch across the roof in a long, scraping arc. Max's ears flicked back, body stiffening. Raymond tapped 2 fingers on the floor. "Focus here," he murmured. Max lowered himself, eyes never leaving the door. A memory struck. Dust motes floating in helicopter light, radio static cutting through screams, then silence, thick and wrong. Raymond picked up a small tin cup and set it down gently, making only the softest click, training the dog's attention into rhythm instead of fear. It wasn't about obedience. It was survival through routine, and maybe redemption, if a man cared to call it that. A few hours before dawn, Max stood abruptly, nose lifted to the crack beneath the door. Raymond watched, breath held without knowing why. The dog's posture changed, not fear this time, but focus, primal and precise. Max nudged the door, then looked back once, eyes dark and alert. Raymond put on his coat, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the door just enough that cold air knifed in. Max moved fast, faster than his wounds should allow, heading toward the tree line where snow lay untouched except by wind. The forest looked different at night. Pine trunks like tall shadows, branches glittering with frost. Max sniffed along the ground, following something unseen, circling a cluster of stones buried under snow. He pawed once, twice, then dug, snow spewing in small arcs. Raymond pushed snow aside with gloved hands and felt canvas. A fabric bag, tightly bound with twine that had frozen stiff. He cut it open with a pocket knife. The smell rose first. Old paper, machine grease, and something faintly like tobacco. Inside were documents wrapped in plastic, a military personnel file, edges browned by time and heat. A name in bold on the first page, Lieutenant Thomas Marin, same as the melted name tag near the crash. Raymond scanned lines of service records written in the dry, coded language of people trying to tell truth without telling anything at all. Deployment dates, unit transfers. Then something that didn't belong. A photograph tucked between pages. The photo showed a man, a woman, and a little girl standing beside a brick building with a sign too blurred to read. All three smiling, sunlight on their faces, shadows short like summer. The girl held a dog by a leash, a dog the same breed as Max, head tilted, ears perked. But the thing that made Raymond's breath stop wasn't the dog. It was the background, a mural on a wall behind them. He knew that mural. Everyone in the small Montana town had walked past it 100 times without really looking. The rust-red barn painted under a sky of artificial blue. It meant the picture was taken right here, not somewhere foreign or far. Raymond turned the photograph over. A line of handwriting in ink, just barely legible. "If I don't come back, tell her the truth." Max pressed his head against Raymond's side, low and insistent, as if the dog felt the weight of the words too. Wind moved suddenly through the trees, a sound like someone whispering through an open door, and all around them the snow held steady, quiet, as if waiting for something else to emerge. Raymond closed his hand over the photo, pulse striking hard, then looked toward the cabin lights glowing faint behind frost. He didn't know who her was. He didn't know what truth needed telling. But he felt the beginning of something tightening around him, like a story too heavy to carry alone. Above, the sky deepened into a black that held no stars, and in his pocket, the edge of the photograph pressed sharp against his palm, a reminder that the storm wasn't over. It had only changed shape. The storm arrived without warning, hammering the cabin walls as if trying to get inside. Wind howling in long, low moans that sounded too much like memory. Snow blew sideways, a white blur swallowing the pines, smothering the yard, erasing every line that marked where the world began and where it ended. Raymond stacked more firewood by the stove and checked the radio only to hear static, that cold mechanical hiss that had replaced all human voices somewhere around midnight. No phone signal, no landline, no road open in or out. Montana had a way of closing its fist around people during winters like that, and tonight the grip was iron. Max paced in slow circles near the door, head lowered, body taut beneath black and tan fur mottled by healing scars. Every time wind scraped across the roof, the dog froze, one paw lifted, breath held, as if listening for something buried beneath the sound itself. Raymond watched him with a quiet patience, though inside he felt that old tightening in his chest, the kind he used to get just before a field medic was called to run into darkness. He pushed the feeling down and opened the folder he had taken from the fabric bag. Pages yellowed, edges curled like leaves left too long in sun and rain. The file told a story in stiff military language, paragraphs that tried to hide truth in bureaucratic fog. Thomas Marin, K-9 handler, Special Recovery Division, deployments spanning border regions where maps didn't match what was real. One line mentioned asset extraction related to ongoing trafficking investigation. Another referenced narcotic seizures with undocumented collateral risk, the kind of phrase that always meant someone suffered off the record. Then, in stark black letters, an ending too clean to be believable. Cause of death, suicide during operation. Raymond shut his eyes, jaw tightening. He had seen suicides. This was not one of them. Helicopters did not fall out of the sky in perfect silence, and men like Marin did not carve messages into metal unless they knew someone would lie about their dying. Wind slammed into the windows again, and the cabin lights flickered. Max shifted, nose pressing against the crack beneath the door. A growl caught deep in his throat. Not rage, but something colder. Raymond folded another page and found more documents underneath. Scanned signatures, coded remarks, a redacted list of names and locations. He read slowly, lips moving without sound. It struck him then with clarity that felt like pain. Marin wasn't just someone doing dangerous work. He was doing work someone powerful needed buried. Evidence hidden where Snow could keep secrets, if no one came looking. Hours blurred. Fire crackled, then settled into low embers. Raymond drank coffee black and cold, letting it sit heavy in his mouth. Outside, the storm pounded against wood and nail, relentless. He turned another page and a headline caught his eye. Joint Task Force Private Security Contract, Cascade, Protection Group. The company logo printed in red ink was a mountain peak wrapped in a ring, a design Raymond knew too well. 10 years ago, he had served under men wearing that insignia, contractors who believed borders were business opportunities and silence was a weapon. He took a slow breath, almost like he was preparing to hear a wound reopen. Snow seeped under the doorframe as evening turned into night without any change in light. The world had been reduced to flickers of fire and the constant shuddering of walls. Max slept for a moment, head on pause, but woke sharply at the faintest creak. Ears pricked forward, body rigid. Raymond set the file aside and knelt beside the dog, one hand on the fur near his shoulder. "Easy," he whispered, though the word felt too small in a night that seemed to hold something waiting. When the wind reached its loudest, a distant sound cut through it. Not thunder, not a tree breaking, a pop, dull, then a dragging noise, as if someone was crawling through ice. Max sprang up, claws scraping the wood floor, tail rigid like a warning flag. He went to the door and barked once, sharp, unnatural in a storm that swallowed everything. Raymond grabbed his flashlight and rifle, heart beating with that old field rhythm, slow, steady, ready. The door stuck on snow piled high against it, then gave way with a groan. The air outside was brutal, wind slicing across skin in quick, cold knives, snow catching in beards and lashes. Max leapt into the drifts and immediately veered to the right, head low, sniffing, tracking something invisible under the storm's roar. Raymond followed, stepping through knee-deep powder, breath ringing in ears, light bouncing off flakes that moved like sparks. At first he saw only white, then a smear of dark red, thin, trailing from the trees. Fresh blood, not frozen yet, warm enough to steam faintly on the surface of snow. Max lowered his head to sniff, muscles quivering, then moved forward again, paw over paw like he was following a scent older than fear itself. Raymond's flashlight shook slightly, not from cold, but from the certainty growing inside. Someone else was here. Someone who had been close. The trail led to a slight dip where fallen branches formed a kind of shelter. Raymond swept the beam across the hollow and saw a movement. A figure, half buried, elbows dragging against snow, breath labored, each exhale a soft cloud fading instantly. A man, face pale beneath frost, wearing a black tactical jacket torn across the chest. The left hand clutched a wound near his ribs. The right hand curled around something metallic, a badge or patch. Raymond edged closer, knees sinking into snow, and saw the emblem clearly under the light. A mountain peak wrapped in a ring. Cascade Protection Group. Max stood rigid, tail tucked halfway, head down, not aggressive but alert, like he recognized the scent. The man looked up, eyes unfocused, pupils blown wide in shock, and tried to speak. Snow stuck to his teeth when he opened his mouth. At first it was only air, then sound, a voice shredded by pain. They're not done yet. They're coming for the dog. Raymond held the light steady, the wind snapping his coat like a flag, snow swirling around man, dog, and rifle in a spinning halo of white. He didn't move toward the stranger. He didn't move away. For a moment, everything held still. Just breath, snow, blood, and those words hanging in the frozen air, unfinished and too late to take back. The man was colder than the snow around him by the time Raymond pulled him inside, body slumped over one shoulder like a memory too heavy to carry. Max followed close, paws skidding on the pine floor, breath fogging in sharp bursts, eyes fixed on the stranger's chest. The cabin smelled of iron and firewood, and outside the storm beat its fists against the window, wind rattling the glass in long, uneven shivers. Raymond laid the man on a wool blanket near the stove, heat rising from the cast iron door, and knelt beside him, trying to find the place where life still flickered beneath bruised ribs and frozen cloth. The stranger's face was gray, jaw rough with stubble, mid-30s maybe. Hair soaked with melting snow that left small puddles around him. Black tactical jacket torn clean across the abdomen, gloves missing, fingers stiff and bent like the branches of a dead tree. Raymond pressed a hand to the wound and saw crimson leak through. Slow, thin, the color of wine diluted with water. Max whined, low and steady, as if urging haste. The man's eyes flickered open, pupils wide and drifting, voice barely there, stuck between cough and whisper. "Dog," he breathed. "The dog." Raymond leaned closer, hearing every word like a confession delivered at the edge of night. "They used him," the stranger said, breath breaking in ragged pieces. "Operation, black retrieval, evidence, military contractor. He got close, too close." His head turned, attempting to see Max, as if seeking a witness rather than comfort. "Chip in the collar," he rasped. "Data hidden, names, payments, people in uniform selling lives." He coughed, each spasm cutting deeper into the silence. Raymond's mind snapped into an old kind of clarity, the sort reserved for battlefield nights, when truth appeared in fragments carried on dying voices. "Cascade," the stranger gasped. "Not a crash. Termination. Clean exit." His gaze fixed on Raymond suddenly, eyes wet and furious. "Don't trust any report." Raymond said nothing. He just listened, hand steady on the wound, the other reaching for the dog's collar with new understanding. Wind slammed the walls as if punctuating every broken sentence. The stranger's breathing slowed, chest stuttering, a clock winding down. One final breath escaped between cracked lips, a whisper nearly swallowed by the storm. "They're coming. For the dog." Then nothing, only the faint ticking of cooling embers in the stove. Then Max exhaling through clenched teeth, a sound not quite sorrow, not quite fear. Raymond closed the man's eyes. A moment passed in which he could pretend the storm outside was only weather and not warning. But then came a noise different from wind, a thump against the porch like boots packing snow. Then another, and a voice muffled by fabric, urgent and hostile. Max barked, short and violent, leaping toward the door, body taut as bowstring. Raymond killed the lights with one motion, plunging the cabin into sudden darkness, except for the red glow of the stove and the ghost-blue flicker of winter beyond the window. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. 3 figures moved through the doorway with disciplined efficiency, dressed in black winter gear, faces hidden under balaclavas, each carrying something matte and metallic. Raymond didn't think, didn't plan, didn't remember what it was to hesitate. He grabbed the rifle leaning by the stove and fired a single shot into the ceiling, sound exploding through the cabin like thunder in a canyon. The intruders ducked, 2 fanning right, 1 left, trained movements, veteran hands. Max launched forward, teeth bared, colliding with the nearest man's leg. A scream cut through the storm, short and cut off by impact. "Go!" Raymond hissed, voice low but shaking with adrenaline. "Move, soldier!" Max tore free, darting through the broken door first, body disappearing into the storm's white mouth. Raymond followed, boots punching through drifts, snow-blind and breath burning in his throat. Gunfire cracked behind him, flashes of orange against black, echo swallowed instantly by wind. He didn't count how many rounds he had left. He only counted steps. Cold found every place skin met fabric. Branches tore at sleeves, batted his face, left thin cuts across cheeks and knuckles. Max moved ahead in sharp zigzags, almost swallowed by snow, tracking some direction beyond human sense. Raymond kept pace, knees screaming, shoulder throbbing where the old scar felt newly alive. Behind them, voices roared from the cabin, men calling out orders drowned by the blizzard. Then silence again, terrifying in its completeness. They reached a rocky outcrop, an old hunting shelter carved by time into the hillside, nearly hidden by heavy snow and drifting shadows. Max slid inside first, body shaking, lungs pushing steam into the cold air. Raymond followed, dragging himself on elbows, pulse hammering, fingers numb but still closing around the rifle. The cave smelled of damp stone, pine roots, and earth held in winter's fist. Wind howled at the entrance but could not enter. Raymond clicked on a pocket flashlight, its beam shaky but enough to paint the walls with pale light. Max lay down, trembling, shoestring of breath uneven but alert. Slowly, Raymond reached toward the collar, hands careful as surgeons' hands without instruments. The metal was cold, edges sharp where fire had warped it. He twisted until a small plate loosened, revealing a compartment no larger than a postage stamp. Inside, a microchip glinted dull silver. He pulled a camera from his pack, an old field model with scuffed casing and a cracked screen, something he had been using to document bits of winter before the world turned strange. The camera accepted the chip with a soft click, then screen flickering to life. Grainy yellow-green light illuminating 2 words in bold white text that seemed too gentle for a night. Like this: "Faith is not what we find after the storm. It's what makes us walk through it." Raymond stared as if reading a prayer carved on stone thrown up from the sea. Max's breathing steadied, eyes half closed. watching the device as if he recognized the weight of the message. Marin had not hidden evidence after all. He had hidden a lesson, something beyond revenge, beyond survival. A request, a question, a reminder that humans forget their best selves when storms arrive. Yet sometimes storms are the only things that reveal those selves at all. Outside, the blizzard eased for one long moment, a silent breath held by the world. Raymond allowed himself to imagine the warmth of a wood stove, the sound of coffee dripping into a tin cup, the feel of an ordinary morning untouched by secrets. But then a sound drifted in, colder than wind and cleaner than gunfire. A steady whirring, mechanical and precise, like wings that never tire. Max lifted his head, ears forward, body sinking low to the ground. Raymond crawled to the cave's mouth and aimed the light outward. Above the treetops, something moved. Sleek, black, and circling. A drone, rotors slicing air with surgical grace, its undercarriage glowing with a cold blue light that swept across snow like a phantom spotlight. It passed once, slow, then turned, locking onto something below. The beam narrowed, sharpening into a blade of color that landed on Raymond's boots and Max's fur. He killed the flashlight. The cave went dark, but the snow outside kept shining with that unearthly blue, marking the place where two figures lay hidden, breathing, waiting, knowing the storm was no longer their only enemy. The light above the treetops drifted away, leaving only darkness and the heaving sound of wind tunneling through the spruce. Raymond pressed his back to cold stone, pulse drumming in his neck, while Max crouched low beside him, shoulder rising and falling in fast, shallow breaths. He could hear them, heavy boots crunching, distant at first, then closer, then pausing as if men were sniffing the air like animals. Snow swirled past the cave mouth in hard white ribbons. Not a storm now, but something hungrier, deliberate, moving with the kind of patience that belonged to men who waited for fear to ripen. Raymond signaled with two fingers in the dark, muscles remembering habits they had tried to forget. Max nudged forward, head low, ears pinned back. They slipped out of the cave and into the timber, each step breaking a thin crust of ice like glass underfoot. The forest expanded into a cathedral of pines and weighted branches, trunks covered in hoarfrost that glittered pale blue under the fragments of moonlight, filtered by cloud. Somewhere ahead, faint as memory, a steady glow pulsed beyond the trees. A rescue station long abandoned, once used by fire crews and backcountry medics. Its roof caved in, but power lines still humming in winter storms. Gunfire snapped, sharp and metallic, ricocheting through snow-laden branches. Raymond ducked and ran, breath torn into bits. "Move," he whispered, not shouting, because shouting was for people who wanted to be heard. Max darted left, weaving through fallen logs, paws throwing up powder in rapid arcs. A spotlight glared up behind them, cold and bluish, sweeping over the trunks, breaking shadows apart. They sprinted toward that glow like moths choosing flame over darkness. The old rescue station came into view as a black outline against white ground, windows blown out, front door hanging by a single rusted hinge. Raymond pushed through, boots sliding across debris, the smell of diesel and mold rising like ghosts in a forgotten room. Max stayed close, tail stiff, head pivoting toward every creak. Raymond overturned a crate, uncovered a small, dented metal cylinder with wires protruding, an improvised thermal mine he once used overseas, something he swore never to touch again. But war has a way of following people home, even across oceans and years. He planted 2 charges by instinct, one near the entrance, one behind a fallen beam slick with frozen oil. A memory sparked in his mind. Voices teaching him how to build things meant to destroy. Hands showing him where to hide them so no one would expect mercy. He tasted metal in his mouth, bitter as regret. Outside, the crunch of snow grew louder, heavier, like giants wading through drifts. Boots. 3 sets. Maybe more. He looked at Max, eyes gentle even now. "I need you to run when I say," Raymond murmured. Max only stared, unblinking, as though he understood language beyond sound, a promise rather than command. The first intruder entered, without speaking, muzzle sweeping across shadows, night vision goggles glowing green like cat's eyes in darkness. Raymond's finger tightened on the detonator. "Now," he breathed. A flash, heat, sound folding in on itself in a violent blossom of white light. The mine snapped, a blunt roar shaking the walls, sending wood fragments airborne. Snow lunged inward, sucked through the door by the concussion. 2 men went down instantly, bodies flung backward through the doorway. The third stumbled, coughing, eyes watering behind goggles. Raymond seized his rifle, fired a single shot, grazing rather than hitting, but enough to send the man scrambling behind broken counters. Max bolted forward, teeth bared, a streak of living force amid smoke. The intruder swung his pistol blindly, firing twice. One round struck a metal shelf, sparks bouncing, but the second found flesh with a dull thud. Max yelped, shoulder jerking, body spinning sideways into a crate. The sound was small, but it split the night apart, a sound Raymond would remember long after the snow melted from Montana. "No," Raymond said, voice cracking under a weight too sudden and too old. He fired toward the intruder, forcing him back toward a rusted storage drum still slick with fuel. The air smelled of cordite, burned rubber, and damp earth. The station's walls trembled, as if undecided whether to hold or collapse. Max struggled to stand, front paw scrabbling against the floor, blood staining the fur near his shoulder, eyes fierce and refusing surrender. "Go!" Raymond shouted, voice thick. "You have to go." But Max staggered upright and placed himself between Raymond and the gunman, teeth bared despite the pain. Snow blew in through the shattered doorway in a long, rushing gasp, cold swirling around them like breath from something ancient and unforgiving. The gunman steadied his aim, rising from cover, barrel fixed on Raymond. Max stepped into the line of fire, wounded shoulder shaking but stance unbroken, something almost human in that stubborn defiance. For the smallest moment, time balanced on nothing. One dog, one man, one choice. Raymond exhaled once, long and steady, then fired a single shot into the fuel drum. The world erupted. A bloom of white fire roared through the room, swallowing sound, swallowing thought. Heat crashed outward, shoving Raymond back, lifting Max off the ground, pushing everything into a spinning blur of smoke, snow, sparks, and light bright enough to bleach memory. The explosion muted every noise into a ringing absence, a silence so violent it felt alive. Walls tore open, roof coughing shrapnel into night sky, flame licking upward as if trying to burn a hole into winter itself. Then darkness, a stillness broken only by wind sifting through ash and falling snow hissing against heat. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sky thinned into pale blue, and search crews arrived from the highway, radios crackling, boots crunching on ground left, patchy and steaming. One of them, a tall paramedic in a red parka with frost threading his beard, stopped near the ruins. "Over here," he called, voice low, almost reverent. Something strange. In the snow, where blast heat had carved space, lay 2 impressions in the white. The shape of a man on his back, arm extended, palm open. Beside it, the outline of a dog curled protectively, their edges softened and glistening like glass. Steam rose from the impressions, vapor floating upward in delicate strands that caught light like silk threads. The paramedic knelt, gloved fingers hovering, not daring to touch. Silence stretched in thin, fragile lines. A faint sound broke it, so slight it could have been the wind. A soft breath rising from beneath a drift where snow had collapsed over wreckage. The paramedic leaned closer, eyes narrowing. The air trembled once, as if something below was remembering how to breathe. A second breath, unmistakable, trembling, alive. The snow didn't disappear all at once. It thinned in slow surrender, receding into gutters and field edges, turning from solid white to a damp translucence that kept secrets beneath its melting skin. People started to talk again in town, voices tentative like waking from a long sleep. The road to the old rescue station reopened, one lane at first, plowed in wavering lines past trees still bent under winter's weight. You could smell wet earth again. You could hear water moving under ice, the first sound of spring in a place that had almost forgotten softness. And there, where familiar paths met the outskirts of town, a monument grew from raw ground. A block of polished stone, dark gray, set with two simple words in carved silver letters. The Storm Rescue. No date, no names. Just the title, like a story the town had decided to remember without having to explain. Raymond sat not far from that marker, wrapped in a thick coat, feet resting on the footrests of a wheelchair, borrowed from the clinic on Elm Street. His arm was still bound up tight, wrapped in linen and compression gauze, fingers stiff but moving now and then, as though remembering something they wanted to hold. Behind him, nurses from the long-term care unit whispered as they came and went, hauling boxes of sympathy cards and leftover casseroles people had dropped off without asking if anyone wanted them. Raymond didn't look at any of it. His attention stayed fixed on the dog lying at his side, a tan and black shadow whose head rested on his boot. Max breathed slow, steady, the rise and fall of his chest a quiet miracle every few seconds. The fur on his shoulder had been shaved away around a puckered scar, a crescent-shaped welt where a bullet had passed through too close to bone. He was older now, or maybe just looked that way. A little gray around the muzzle, eyes deeper, gaze carrying something you couldn't put words to. When someone walked by, his tail would thump once, faint but definite, as if acknowledging the living world, and then returning to whatever memory played behind his half-closed eyes. Sheriff Hannah arrived mid-afternoon, walking up the sidewalk with her collar turned against the breeze. She was in her early 50s, tall and angular, with silver strands woven through dark hair tied in a simple braid down her back. Her badge glimmered dull in the low sun, not polished, not shown off. She wore plain black gloves and a dark wool coat that looked older than winter itself. When she reached Raymond, she didn't speak at first. She just took in the sight of him, followed the line of his gaze, then let her eyes settle on Max with a softness that contradicted every rumor about her being made entirely of duty. She held something in her hands, a small drive, no larger than a thumbnail, wrapped in a folded piece of cloth. She knelt beside the chair and placed it on Raymond's lap, as if setting down something fragile. "It's decoded," she said quietly, not looking up. "You should see what's on it." Raymond nodded, slow, as if agreeing to face something long postponed. He fumbled one-handed for the cloth, unwrapping it without hurry. Inside was the chip taken from Max's collar, now marked with a thin strip of tape and a handwritten label. Marin, final logs. Raymond eyed the words as though they were a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through memory. He had lost many things to secrecy in his life, but this was not a secret. This was a voice. A portable tablet sat on the small table beside him, propped open next to a cup of untouched coffee. Hannah clicked the chip into a battered adapter, then into the tablet, fingers moving with the same precision she once used unloading service pistols in barracks years ago. The screen lit up, snow glare faded, and the first frame appeared. Shaky, low-resolution footage of a man sitting near a campfire under a plastic tarp. Rain hitting canvas, wind shaking the camera. His face was lean, stubbled, eyes tired but sane. Latine Marin, alive in a storm somewhere far away from where he died. The video played without sound for a moment. Then a voice came through. Rough but steady, like someone speaking into the darkness so later it might speak back. "If this finds you, keep walking," he said. "Even when you think you've lost everything." Raymond didn't blink. He just let the words land. Let them sink in like thaw water soaking deep into soil that hadn't felt warmth in months. Another clip followed. Marin dragging a woman out of floodwater, both of them soaked and shaking. Then guiding children down a ravine while dusk crept in from all directions. Then sitting alone in a tent, staring at the camera with an expression almost embarrassed by tenderness. "Sometimes," he whispered, "we don't rescue them. They rescue us." Hannah stepped back, giving space invisible but necessary. Max lifted his head slightly, ears twitching, eyes drawn to the voice on the screen, even though he couldn't place why it moved him. Raymond reached down and brushed a hand through Max's fur, slow and grateful. "We're still walking," he murmured, low, more to himself than to anyone else. Then, with a faint laugh that cracked the air like sunlight through cloud, he added, "Aren't we?" The town carried on around them, unaware of the quiet moment unfolding. Cars passing with windows down for the first time in weeks. School children dragging backpacks across sidewalks still damp with melt. A grocer unloading crates of early spring produce no one had expected so soon. The air was filled with the smell of sap rising in pine trunks, of wet gravel warming under afternoon light, of smoke from a distant brush pile where someone was burning the last remnants of winter limbs snapped under snow. A breeze stirred. The camera angle widened in the tablet, showing Marin's smile spread slightly, uncertain, hopeful, then freeze-framing on a single tear at the edge of his eye. The screen dimmed. Max let out a long breath, head pressing into Raymond's leg with weight that said, "I am here, and I will stay." The sun dipped behind cloud, turning sky from pale silver into something warm and barley-colored. Snowmelt pooled along curbs, catching gold light, turning puddles into mirrors of a world coming back to life. A single crow landed on the monument post, black feathers glistening before taking off again, wings beating slow and powerful. Raymond closed the tablet. Hannah nodded once and stepped away, not needing to say goodbye, not needing to linger. Max stood on shaky legs, stretched, then looked out toward the open field beyond. Raymond adjusted his wheels, gently tapping them forward. The dog walked ahead, not running, not pulling, just moving, step after steady step, tail raised slightly like a flag in a clearing fog. They reached the pavement where melted snow had gathered into a shallow sheen. It mirrored them perfectly. Man in a chair, dog with a scar. Two shapes moving together in rhythm. The reflection shimmered and broke with each slow turn of wheels, then settled again in perfect alignment. The voiceover could have ended with words, but sometimes silence carries farther. The scene widened, showing more sky, more thawing earth, the edges of winter retreating beyond the frame. A final thought, quiet, as if carried by the wind. Some storms don't end when the wind stops. They end when mercy begins. Max walked on, just ahead, silhouette stretching, merging with light. The reflection blurred once, then faded into brightness too wide to hold. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They settle into quiet corners of our memory, like a warm light left on in a hallway at night. We remember not because of what was won or lost, but because of the way two lives, one human, one animal, chose to keep moving forward when the world turned cold. Loyalty isn't loud. Courage isn't always seen. There are people and a few remarkable dogs who stand between us and the dark in ways we may never fully understand. And they don't do it for praise or headlines. They do it because something in them refuses to give up on goodness. In moments like these, it helps to breathe a little slower, to sit with the weight of gratitude, to think of those quiet hearts carrying the loudest courage, somewhere out there tonight, watching over someone they've never met. Maybe it's enough to know they exist. And when the wind rises again, as it always does, we can hold on to one small certainty. Mercy has a way of returning. It walks beside us, sometimes on two legs, sometimes on four, always a little ahead, showing us where to go next.